I'm Lil. I'm 13 weeks into my second pregnancy. I think what I found harder with my first pregnancy when I didn't have CGM was filling in the gaps. So even if I was doing kind of, in the end, 15 to 20 finger pricks a day, it still couldn't fill in the bits that were missing. So I think what I get the most out of CGM and what I really got a lot out of when trying to conceive this time was that I could go to bed at a 7.5, wake up at a 5 and know what I was in between, which made a big difference. It's had a great effect on my physical health in terms of my HbA1c, my general control, but I think mentally, sort of emotionally, it's really helped me because it's really reassuring to know, especially in early pregnancy, which direction you're heading and that you can trust that you're going to stay relatively on target, even in a kind of point where you won't be able to check in as often. That's really meant the world to me, and I think that's been really important for my family as well, because I've got 2 toddlers, and knowing that I'm kind of not necessarily going to go hypo or high when I'm out with them has been a great sort of reassurance to me. I think for a lot of people it can be pretty overwhelming. I have friends that are on them and struggle with the amount of data that there is. I think for me, I've never struggled with that. I didn't struggle with that when moving on to a pump either. I don't mind being connected to something all the time, and I don't mind the fact that it's always on and I can always look at it, but I think some people might find that quite hard. Okay, so the early stages of pregnancy for me have been relatively easy this time, relatively smooth. I've had some classic symptoms, morning sickness, tiredness, that kind of thing. But I think in terms of diabetes, I've had quite a lot of severe hypos, which is not something that I'm really used to. I don't get loads of them in my normal unpregnant life. So I usually get quite a lot of symptoms. So before I was pregnant, I would hit sort of 4.5 and start feeling a bit wobbly. And in early pregnancy, I've sort of dropped to 2, 2.1, 1.8, figures like that without feeling anything, which is obviously really scary. And they take, in general, they take longer to come up as well. So I think that CGM has really helped in that sense because it's just there in front of me. I can see the results as they come in. And a lot of the time my hypos have been in the night, which is obviously really scary. So the alarms have really helped because they've woken me up when they happen, but also I can just watch it until it comes up and then I know I'm safe to go back to sleep again. I have a lot of concerns in early pregnancy. I think anyone does, diabetic or not. But I think with diabetes, obviously things can get a lot more complicated more quickly. And I think for me, having had a previous pregnancy, I knew that my hypos were likely to come back. So that has been a real concern for me. I think obviously like a big concern is just miscarriage or, harming the baby in some way because your levels aren't good enough. So I think that, again, like for me, knowledge has always been important and it feels like power. So I think that just having the data when I need it has really helped me with those concerns, because even if things are going wrong, I know I'm aware of it and I know that I can help get it under control again. When I first got a CGM, I felt like the luckiest person in the world, realistically. I think because as a type 1, I've had type 1 for 27 years, so you hear when these things are on the horizon, and then when they finally get into your hand, it's amazing. So I find it really reassuring because I find all the information just really exciting. It sounds really geeky, but like I just love reading. I love the reports. I love printing them off. I love looking at them. I like all the information that I just didn't have before, because I found finger pricks not only really painful but really frustrating, because you could finger prick and be a 5.9 and then finger prick half an hour later and be a 7.8, and you don't know what's happened in between and you don't know why it's rising and that kind of thing. So I think that I find CGM really reassuring because you get an idea for where things are going and you can pick up patterns a lot easier than it is with just simple writing down your results with pen and paper, I think. It is easy to feel overwhelmed by the amount of information that CGM gives you. Personally, I haven't really suffered with that much. I get it sometimes, I think everyone does, because you hit a bit of burnout or you're just sick of thinking about it and your alarm won't stop going off and you can't put it right, but it won't shut up, and it can get quite overwhelming. But I think for me that's been fairly minimal. I can understand how, especially if you've got on well with finger pricks, you've got on well with just recording things, your diabetic life has been relatively simple so far, and you go onto it, you can kind of think like, oh, what is this? I don't need it. It's a lot. But I think for me, there were always questions that I couldn't answer, and that have been my whole life. So I think that for me, I just found it really exciting that there was that much information on offer. One of the key things that I would highlight for new users is look at the trend arrows. The trend arrows are so important and they're so helpful, and there's a lot to take in. So I probably didn't utilise them as well as I could have for quite a long time, and I think that they really help me in terms of I can really predict where things are going. So if I think I'm going to go hypo in an hour or so, because of the trend arrows, I can see that now. So I would hit anything below a 5, and if the direction of travel was down or diagonal down, I would treat it there and then. Even just micro carbing or whatever it needs to try and preempt the symptoms kicking in, because the symptoms are horrible and they can stay with you for ages and they can stop you getting stuff done. And when you've got a full-time job and 2 toddlers, you don't need those kind of things taking up your time. So I've found that really helpful. And the same with highs as well, because again, you can feel horrible from them. So I think if you can preempt them, that's the thing to do. And I think the trend arrows are really useful. I found CGM really useful in avoiding hypos. I generally, I can get symptoms at a kind of a 4.5 or a 4, which is quite high. So if I test or if I see the screen and it's on anything below a 5, I would generally start to treat a hypo, or at least kind of half treat it, give myself a lower dose of carbs to try and preempt it dropping any lower, because the trend arrows can give you a real sense of what direction it's going in. And I think probably if it was going anything even sideways sometimes, and I know that I've still got insulin on board, or definitely if it's going straight down or to this the diagonal down, then I know that a hypo is coming, so I can treat it ahead of time before I get any of the symptoms. When it comes to alarms, I have my high alarm set at 7.8 and my low alarm set at 3.9, which are pregnancy targets, but I had them set for about 3 months pre-pregnancy as well, so that I knew what I was aiming for. I also have sound alarms on for a high or a low rise rate or drop rate. So if I drop 2 millimoles or more in a minute, I think it is, it'll alert me to tell me I'm going down very quickly or up very quickly, which again helps me preempt where my sugars are going and how to treat that. The alarms, unless I'm in the cinema, they're always on sound, because if they're on vibrate, they're easy to miss. So they're always on sound, and I found that really useful. They can be annoying, but once you get used to them, I think they're okay really, and the benefits far outweigh the disadvantages in my view. Mealtime highs are one of the areas where I actually find CGM quite problematic, because it's hard not to look at it. So I've been told by my consultant time and time again, bolus for the food you're eating, wait for it to work. And I think that can be really difficult when you start off at a 6 or a 7 and then you see your sugars rise in response to the food. So I found it quite hard to keep my hands off my pump in those kind of hours following food. But I think there are obviously benefits to having the CGM as well, because you can see where you are when you started, you can see the direction of travel when you're eating, and so you can kind of factor that into what you're bolusing for. So I think it can be useful, but I found that one of the hardest kind of places to manage, because it's really hard to get out of your brain. Looking at the overall report from the last couple of weeks of my glucose data is amazing. For me, it's like almost like nothing short of thrilling. I love it because it gives you so much data in one place, and it kind of leaves it up to you what you do with it. So on the front of the one that I get, there's a snapshot, so it gives you your predicted HbA1c, your average glucose, all the important things, but it also picks up patterns for you. So it will tell you that you've got a pattern of overnight highs or morning lows or whatever it is that's coming up a lot. And I think that even if you're seeing the results, if you're not a professional and you're tired and you've got other stuff going on, it can be really hard to pick up the patterns yourself. So I think it's really useful that they do that. And then you can go through and you can see it day by day. And I love it. I think it's brilliant. If I'm being honest, when I go to my healthcare team with my report, at the stage that I am, 27 years in, I only need reassurance, really. I think that for a lot of people, they see their consultant for kind of help picking up patterns and things like that, but I feel quite confident making the changes that I need to make myself. And when I go and see my consultant, especially during pregnancy, because you see them every 2 weeks, which is amazing, it's really nice to just know that you're making the right decisions, that you're competent in making the tweaks yourself, and that someone can look at them and be like, yes, you've made the right choice there and you're doing the right thing. So I found that really useful. I mean, obviously they're more useful than that in other ways, but generally for me, just because of the experience I have, I feel like I'm confident in making my own decisions as long as I can see them and know that they're going to back me up. When you're a type 1, it can feel like an uphill battle constantly, and it kind of feels like often kind of what's the point in adding something else to worry about, and to kind of a new challenge to take on, especially when you're already struggling with the day-to-day changes of your blood sugars and keeping an eye on them. I think what I would say is that it's not necessarily as hard as you think it's going to be. It was a lot smoother process than I thought it was going to be for me. And I think that there is a lot of support that you can access if you need it. And I think that's really important. And I found that really useful in terms of clinical support. I get a lot through my clinics from my consultant. And also I think it's, in terms of steps to take, I would make sure that when you're trying to get your sugars in range, or when you're trying to kind of hit those pre-pregnancy targets, you make sure that someone is there to hold you accountable. So it might be a consultant, realistically it probably isn't. So you can tell your best friend, tell your husband, tell your partner, tell your mum or your dad. And I think just having someone else know what you're aiming for, and to have them kind of along for the ride with you, will make a huge difference, or at least it has for me. And I found that a lot in my second pregnancy as well, because I have 2 3-year-olds, and this would just be the hardest thing in the world if I didn't have people around me to help and to check in and to try to understand what I'm going through, even though I think realistically it's difficult for anyone without type 1 to really understand. I think if people try, then that's really helpful.